The city of St. Louis was founded here on the west bank of the Mississippi River in 1764 by French fur traders. At the time, St. Louis and all the land that would become Missouri was actually in Spanish territory. But it wasn't long before American settlers started exploring what Missouri had to offer. One of those was an American frontiersman named Daniel Boone, who would gain fame opening up Kentucky to settlers. In 1799, Boone left Kentucky and arrived in Missouri. The Boones built a massive stone house here in what's now the town of Defiance. School children flock here from miles around to learn about what life was once like on the Missouri frontier. The house was built with 2.5-foot thick stone walls to protect Boone and his family from attack by members of Missouri's Indian tribes. From this house, Boone witnessed the historic events that would make Missouri a U.S. territory. In 1800, Spain turned over the Louisiana Territory to France. 3 years later, France sold it to the U.S. for $15 million. It included all of what's now the state of Missouri. The next year, the legendary explorers Lewis and Clark arrived at the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. They were the first European Americans to map and document the Missouri interior. It wasn't easy going. During much of their journey upriver, they didn't sail or even row. They trudged along the river's banks, pulling their boats with ropes instead. As they worked their way upriver, William Clark noticed a spot high above the banks of the Missouri that would make a good site for a U.S. fort. After the expedition, Clark returned to build a fort and trading post here in 1808. First named Fort Clark, but later known as Fort Osage, it was one of the first outposts of the U.S. government west of the Mississippi River and turned Missouri into the gateway to the west. The problem was, Native American tribes like the Great and Little Osage, who already lived here, were seen as a threat to the new settlers. So Clark and the U.S. government started trying to convince the tribes to give up their lands. In the fall and early winter of 1808, while Fort Osage was still being constructed, representatives of the government convinced the chiefs of the Great and Little Osage nations to sign away roughly 50,000 square miles of land forever. In return, they were promised $1,500 in cash a year, and that they could still live and hunt here. The treaties guaranteed that the tribes would be protected by the U.S. government. But as a flood of settlers arrived in the region, hungry for more and more land, those promises were quickly broken. Over time, the tribes were forced out of Missouri forever and onto a reservation in Oklahoma. It's a story that was repeated across the new nation as the U.S. government and white settlers expanded west and tried to remove the native populations that stood in their way.